Oh, hello my friends, hope you are well. Today I'm back with another installment of my custom 40k Kitbashed Swamperial Guard army, whipping up a swampy little Sentinel to support our boys in purple. That was a bit of a mouthful. Anyway, let's get into it.
Swamp Rip. Miniatures.
I'm quite excited to add the first of these Sentinels to our ranks, as it's a model I've always really liked the look of, but never got around to making. Now that I'm building this swampy Cadian fusion army though, I have the perfect reason to finally build one up and give it a bit of swampification to match the aesthetic we've been creating in the army so far. I'm not going to be mixing any other kits with this unit like I have in the previous two Field Ordnance Battery Kitbashed videos I did. Go check those out if you want a golden goose to lay a golden egg on your head this Christmas, as I want to keep the vast majority of the physical structure of this model looking the same, since I think it's quite a cool and unique looking model already. For the driver, however, I will be going with our tried and tested method of Cadian and green skin polymerization, delicately fusing the head of a handsome little snotling with this cap that had been generously donated by a Cadian. And there was definitely a joke in there somewhere about it being a cap and being decapitated, but my tired little rodent brain was not able to string it together. So, best cap decapitation joke in the comments will win a half-eaten Ferrero Rocher. Moving on to the weapons for this bad boy, I'm going to be adding the plasma gun, a chainsword, this missile launcher thingy, and this spotlight, which is not really a weapon unless you're allergic to light, in which case
You better watch out.
And as usual, I haven't really done any research into the specific rules or loadout options for this. I'm just going with whatever looks coolest to me, and then I'll work out the actual viability of it later on, and then cry because it is not viable at all, which is basically the story of my life. Also, I decided not to glue the roof piece down, as this one piece alone changes the miniature from a scout sentinel to an armored sentinel, so keeping this detachable means that you basically have two models in one, getting more bang for your buck and more options in your unit selection for gameplay. And anyway, here she is, looking pretty cool. As I said earlier, I just love the look of these things. There's some clear Star Wars inspiration here, with it looking quite similar to the old robotic chicken walking ATST things, but I want to add a bit of a swampy infusion now and basically turn it into a robotic chicken walking Ent hybrid. So, to get that NT vibe popping off, I'm going to add a few gnarly old tree branches that have sprouted from the driving compartment of our Sentinel. And for this, I'm using a technique I've shown a bunch of times on the channel already, taking some floral wire, snipping off a few little morsels, twisting them together, and then bending these pieces off into something which resembles a branch. I coat this wire skeleton with some hot glue to bulk it out and give it a bit more of a natural branch shape, and then drill a hole into the driving compartment to slot the branch into, which probably wasn't necessary really. I think I was just in the mood for some drilling, but either way, I secured it in place with a bit more hot glue. I then repeated this process to add a couple of smaller branches, except for these ones. I secured the wire in place first and then coated them with the hot glue so I could have them bending around some of the other components. My headcanon for this piece is that, like the rest of our army's gear, the Sentinel has been long abandoned by its previous Cadian owners, left to rot out in the dingy swamps, only to be reclaimed by our little green boys and put into action. In the time it lay dormant, the swamp fauna found its way into the vehicle through tiny cracks and crevices and sprouted out the branch-like growths we see today. This was no bother to our greenskins, of course. They're just happy to have some functioning combat equipment, and if anything, it helps the Sentinel blend in with the rest of the swampy homeland. So, once my branches are all in place, add a coating of my homemade mud mixture to cover up the smooth surface of the hot glue and give it a more natural barky texture, and here's how she's looking so far. Pretty cool if I say so myself. I don't want to add too many branches, as I don't want to completely lose the silhouette of the Sentinel, so I think this larger one on top and the two smaller ones sprouting out from the bottom give me a good balance here. Anyway, I unexpectedly primed this in Wraithbone because the grey prime I'd bought the other day was actually just a gloss paint in a grey can, and the priming came out all horrible and cracked. I think maybe it's due to the bloody Arctic conditions outside when I was priming it, or maybe I'd sprayed too much on, but either way it wasn't a great priming experience overall. Luckily though, I want the paint job for this mini to look quite corroded and textured, so it wasn't all bad, and it was time to start slapping on that viscous liquid joy, also known as paint. This is going to be a relatively quick paint job actually, as the bulk of the miniature is built up of armoured plates that are all going to be the same purple colour we've been using for our army up to this point. So to begin, I just go around and paint in the details that will be metallic with a black undercoat, then come back in with a standard kind of plate metal metallic colour to add a bit of sheen to those previous areas on the legs, the weapons, the exhaust, and then the little roll cage bit on top. Next up, I'm using some Xerius purple to go around and colour in all those armoured pieces I mentioned a moment ago, and this colour actually looks really nice and vibrant over the Wraithbone primer, which is cool because normally I'm painting this over a grey primer, which can dull it down a bit, but it does also mean that I have to give some areas 2 or even 3 coats of this paint, as the brighter primer does take a bit more effort to cover up completely. At first I was being really meticulous and kind of all attentive and really making sure I was getting a solid coat of purple on everything, and then I was more like, you know, yeah, most of it's going to get covered up when I add the grime in a minute anyway, so it probably doesn't need to be a perfect smooth coat, as you can probably see in some of the areas here. Anyway, next up, I added a base coat to the branches using a nice dark Rhinoxide brown colour, and then I splashed a bit of this Black Legion contrast paint into the driving compartment, which was actually really annoying because I had to shove my brush in and root it all around there like a hungry anteater trying to find its dinner. After that, I painted on the Aquila and the missile details, and then began the process of adding some really quick and easy edge highlights to everything else on the Mini. I was slapping these on without much grace, as I wasn't sure how much of it would actually be visible when we dirty everything up. So much like the purple undercoat, they're not the tidiest in the world, and I was kind of debating whether I should be painting these on to look all perfect and immaculate just so it'd look better for the video, but I decided to keep it real for you guys instead, as this is pretty much how I paint my tabletop miniatures. I'll put effort into the things that need to look nice and polished when finished, but for the things that are going to be obscured or covered up anyway, I'm not going to waste my time, as I just want to get them finished and onto the table as soon as possible. And speaking of techniques for increasing the speed of your finished paint jobs, this lucky Sentinel is going to receive my first ever splash of streaking grime. I've seen this used by a lot of other painters to get a nice dirty grim dark look, and thought it was probably about time to test it out for myself. I'm hoping this stuff will give me the I've just been dragged out of a swamp look I'm going for, so I'm basically coating the entire model in it and then setting it aside to part dry for about 20 minutes or so. Once it's dried off a good amount, I take a splash of white spirit and my little cotton buds and start dabbing away some of the grime to reveal the hidden colours below. And I don't want to remove all the grime of course, so I make sure to leave the recessed areas quite dirty and stop before I get overzealous with the cleaning. This is what we're left with, and I have to say it does look pretty freaking awesome and took a fraction of the time it would take me to dirty this up using other methods. So a solid win there, I'd say. I do want to add a bit more of a textured patina to the armoured plates though, so I use a bit of sponge to stipple on my original purple colour, followed by a lighter one, and then finally a brown to simulate some rusty chipping of the paint. And I probably went a bit over the top with this in some places, but overall I like the texture and the brighter look it's built. So now it's just time to paint in the remaining details. First up, the branches, which get the usual treatment, a couple of different dry brushes of browns, followed by some different coloured washes for a bit of variation in the hues, and then a couple of green stippled layers to simulate some moss. I then painted the driver in, which was annoying because I had to work around the roll cage and the sides of the cockpit, so this was basically just a more annoying version of when I used the black contrast paint earlier, as this time I had to be much more precise and I was trying to get the usual kind of highlights and details on the driver. So yeah, maybe should have painted this guy before I added him in, but the world is full of maybes, you know. Maybe I shouldn't have had that 5th croissant for breakfast. Either way, the green boy got painted, I felt sick from too much pastry, and the world kept spinning. I also painted up a cheeky little snotling here too, because I've been loving adding these to my bases as extra little details recently, and they are the little minions of our swamp forces of course, so it was only right to do so. Then all that was left to do was the little spotlight thing here on the shoulder, the plasma coil thing on the plasma gun, which is kind of self-explanatory I suppose, and then finally the windows or the lenses, whatever you want to call them up here on the cab. So yes. That's all the painting work done on our miniatures, and I was feeling pretty happy about them actually. They aren't perfect because I've never painted anything that was perfect, and I probably never will, but they look pretty cool, so they just need a little base to stand on now. I wanted to add a little bit more detail to the base than I did for the field ordnance batteries I've made, as we had a bit more space to work with. So I took some offcuts of XPS foam, trimmed them down into a somewhat cylindrical shape, and started roughing them up until they resembled a couple of happy little tree stumps. I glued these down to the base, then used some little snippings of floral wire to act as roots protruding from each of the stumps. And much like our branches from earlier, these roots received a loving squelch of hot glue to flesh them out a bit and have them resemble something like the roots of a mangrove swamp. The entire thing gets a coating with my homemade mud mixture for the added texture, you all know the deal by now, and then I got it primed up ready for painting. I'm going to run through the painting process quite quickly for this because I've already shown it in more detail in the last videos I made for the Field Ordnance battery sets. So it's basically just a base coat of brown, a couple of dry brushes to bring out some of that texture from the mud, then some different greens stippled on for some mossy goodness. I use a couple of washes to add a bit of depth among the roots and any recessed areas of the tree stumps, and then add a layer of this swampy goo stuff which gives the surface a nice glossy, dank, wet look. This is what we're left with after all those steps, which I'd say is pretty on theme for a swamp base and was actually really quick and easy to make. I used the hairdryer to speed up the drying times for this, so all in all it probably only took about an hour or so to make, which is kind of crazy because when I first got back into this hobby, it probably would have taken me all day to make something that looked half as good as this. Anyway, I get our minis glued down to the base, give it our customary rim job, and all that's left to do now is attach a bit of foliage to the branches on our Sentinel. I'm using some pretty standard tree foliage stuff from Woodland Scenics for this, and I'm just draping it over the branches using a bit of super glue to secure it in place. I think this hanging foliage look works best for the swamp aesthetic, as normal clump foliage might end up making this look like it comes from a jungle or a forest or something like that, so that's not what we want. You know, we want it to look like it's come from a dingy old swamp, so definitely go for the hanging foliage if you're doing something similar. I use a touch of watered down PVA glue for some extra durability on the foliage, and then also sprinkle on a bit of fine flock to add some variation in the texture and the colour and just make it look a bit more natural overall. Finally, I had a couple of these little dumb cane plants for good luck, and our Sentinel is ready to go and stomp through the swamp. Swamp Stomper. Oh shit, that's actually a really good name. Yeah, I'm just coming out with that now, but I'm actually really annoyed I didn't think of it earlier. Oh well. Swamp Stomper, baby. My friends, what do you think? I'm really excited to have the first of my Sentinels finished now. This is a mini I've wanted to make for probably years, and it feels good that the first one I've made has been born into my Swamperial Guard army and looks like a kind of swampy and robot chicken ATST hybrid. The streaking grind was really fun to use for the first time. I'm kind of wondering now if I took too much of it off, or maybe didn't let it dry for long enough, or maybe just went in a bit too hard with that stippling I did with the sponge afterwards, as we've lost some of that grimy look. But I still really like how it's come out with the textured patina we have on the armored plates, so I'm still very happy overall. I feel like this army is moving along at a good pace at the moment. It is fairly slow, you know. I'm still working on other projects and dioramas and what have you between these videos, but we're definitely making steady progress. I think combining this with our total points so far means we have around 250 or so points. Can't remember how much I worked out last time, but we've got about an eighth of the minimum points I'm aiming for so far. And this was the fourth video in the Swamperial Guard army build. Go check out the previous three if you want to see what other units I've come up with so far. And all of them up to this point have been centered around our little green skin warriors. But as I said in the first video, well I think it was the first video anyway, while these guys will be the main bulk of our forces, we will have some units built from other swamp creatures coming to join the fight. And I think it's about time to introduce our first unit of these. So check out my next video in the series if you want to see who else is fighting under the swampy flag, and check out my channel if you want to see any of the other random cool things I build and paint. If you enjoyed this, then make sure to subscribe or leave a like or a comment or eat a whole packet of custard creams, you know, whatever you like to do to show your support. For now though, I have been your friendly neighborhood swamp rat, and I will see you very soon in another video. See ya.